Thank you so much for being here, watching this, and thank you, Nazami, for inviting me to be here, and thank you to all the friends who have conspired to bring me here as well. As was said in the introduction, I am a researcher, I am a mother, I am an immigrant, but I think foremost, I'm an educator. And when I think about the journey of becoming an educator, I cannot think about it without thinking about my participation in the Scout movement. I was a Scout as a teenager. And I cannot think about it without thanking the two Scout leaders who have inspired me, who have fed my creativity and my curiosity, who have challenged my worldviews, and who have created opportunities for me to be with rivers, with the forests, and with the mountains, trying to listen and connect to them. So I would like to thank Cynthia and Renato from Grupo Escoteiro São Luís de Gonzaga, the Scout Group São Luís de Gonzaga in Curitiba, who have contributed to who I am today as an educator. So thank you as well for the service that you do to your community. So starting from that, what I'm going to talk today, which I hope they like that this is being recorded, now they're going to see it at some point, is about education. It's about our role as educators, as leaders in our communities, as teachers in schools, as professors and researchers. In anything that we do, we are developing an educational activity. And this educational activity needs to be carried out with a lot of responsibility and depth. So that's the general frame of my presentation today. So my main message is that global citizenship is not about charity, help, or heroism. It is about justice in acts, thoughts, emotions, and relationships. And that it's about losing the fear of feeling our shared vulnerabilities and of taking collective responsibility for the well-being of interconnected life forms in one finite planet facing unprecedented multiple crises. So in order to take you to this journey with me of thinking about what this means, I'm going to use an analogy. I'm going to ask you to imagine a field of corn, full of corn cobs, to harvest your corn and put the corn in front of you. Can you see your corn? Yeah, lots of corn. And I'll ask you if it looks like this. Okay. These are Peruvian corn cobs from Peru. So I use this as an analogy because most of the time people imagine only yellow corn cobs. So the yellow corn cob can be used as an analogy for how our imagination has been colonized. We have been only exposed to one form of corn cob, and it is yellow. And there is actually a reason for that, an economic reason for that. We're not going to go there today. We're going to use the yellow corn cob as an analogy for the template for the stories that we tell each other about schools, what it means to be an educated person, what it means to educate, what our institutions are, what nation states or forms of organizing should be, security, relationships. So these are normalized and naturalized stories that we tell each other within a template. So there is diversity within this template, but this template doesn't get to the multiple colors of corn cobs. It remains within the yellow corn cob. So these stories in relation to global relations have created a situation where part of the world is told, part of the population of the world is told that they are intelligent, they are benevolent, they deserve to be leaders, they are clean, and they have this capacity and entitlement to be leaders of humanity, of progress, and of development. While the other part of humanity is told they are ignorant, they are violent, they are prone to destruction, servitude, they are unsanitary. So this is then related to the multicolored corn cobs. Now, if we think about this relationship of this division of humanity, this is reproduced in schools, this is reproduced in the media, and this is reproduced in our social relations. And this is not something that very easily we can deconstruct and decide not to think like that, because this is not only conscious. This is part of our social relations that are inscripted in the ways that our institutions are formed and the ways that our bodies behave towards each other. So it's not just a question of deciding to deconstruct these relationships and that's it, right? So what I decided to do then, in order to show how difficult it is also, but how people have been trying to do that, is to show two initiatives, one in education, one in citizenship, global citizenship education, that show some of the colored corn cobs trying to speak back and design something new. So the first relationship, the first initiative that I'm going to show to you is from India. Manish Jain actually is leading this initiative, and it's proposing a manifesto for education that sees education very differently from the ways that, for example, Education for All is promoting education across the world. They say that they can no longer accept a narrative of education that teaches people that their village grandmother is illiterate, primitive, backward, stupid, uneducated, underdeveloped, uncivilized, and not capable of managing her own affairs. That their links to their land, their local languages, their seeds, rivers, trees, histories, and her stories, body, inner voice, to the spirit world, and to their communities are all barriers to the modernization and development which must at best be destroyed if we are to progress, or at worst be condemned to a multicultural day festival in school. That physical work in the fields, in their home and in their community is drudgery, and that the definition of happiness lies in drinking Coca-Cola, eating at McDonald's, using Fair and Lovely Face, whitening creams, and chatting on Facebook. That they have to compete against each other in their community and against peoples from other countries to survive. And that learning is a commodity along with the air, water, land, food, and acknowledges the property of individuals through copyrights and patents. So this is a copyleft text shared by the Shikshantai Andolan movement, and it's found on that website. The other initiative I would like to share is from the Chupacpata Global Education Center in Peru. And they say that their idea of global citizenship otherwise means that the entire planet Earth, for example, in that sense of the word Pachamama, is their home and country. Their country is their mother, and their mother knows no borders. That they are all brothers and sisters, humans, rocks, plants, animals, and all others. That the answers to solving the problems of the world are in each one of us, but it's difficult to listen when we are not in balance. That the priority for life and education is balance, and the purpose is to learn, learn, and learn again. There's no complete knowledge. We'll all teach, learn, and keep changing. It's a path without an end. And that the world is changed through love, patience, enthusiasm, respect, courage, humility, and living life in balance, which comes with recognizing our visceral connections to each other and to the land itself. So there are different perspectives then on global citizenship education that I found in my research. And this is a generalization here, but that is a useful generalization for the purpose of what we're doing today. So one perspective from the point of view of the yellow corn cob, global citizenship education is about empowerment, leadership, consensus, progress, national identity, dialogue, innovation, affluence, competition, speed, making a difference to them, and separability. On the perspective of the colored corn cobs that I've been studying, not all of them, of course, instead of empowerment, they are talking about disarmament. Instead of leadership, they are talking about decentering. Instead of consensus, they are talking about pluriversalities. Instead of progress, remembering, which means also remembering in terms of memories, but remembering the fragments of the body that need to be put back together. Instead of national identity, planetarity. Instead of dialogue, listening and presencing. Instead of innovation, wisdom. Instead of affluence, giveaway. Instead of competition, complementarity. Instead of speed, taking time. Instead of making a difference to others, becoming useful to the world under othered terms. And instead of separability, entanglement. So I'm not saying that the yellow corn cob is bad and multicolored corn cobs are good, but what I'm saying is that we've tried this, and we have reap the benefits of this, but also reach the limits of what we've been doing through the yellow corn cob. We cannot think about this as being either or, but being both and more. So we need to think about complementarity in that sense as well. So what I would like to talk about a little bit too, as I finish this presentation, is that thinking about the yellow corn cob and the multicolored corn cobs can give us the idea that it's just about imagining these different colors, but that's not as easy as it seems. Boaventura de Souza Santos talks about this relationship between the yellow and the multicolored corn cobs as a relation related to an abyss. It's like an abyss. On the one side of the abyss, there is the yellow corn cob. On the other side, the yellow corn cob sees nothing. So it's not about what the yellow corn cob doesn't imagine, but what it can't imagine. And in this sense, I go back to the idea of opening our eyes and opening our hearts. So opening our critical eyes to use reason to learn from the recurrent mistakes we have been making so far in order to make different mistakes, and to getting to the limits of our rationality, and opening our hearts to realize we have never been disconnected. What has been severed is our sense of connection to each other, not so much our connection. We can't sever our connection. We are connected through the planet and the interdependence of living in one finite planet. So what? In order to open our critical eyes, to use reason, to learn about things, we need to open the cans of worms. So the complexity, the complicity, the difficult pathway of learning about the past and about the mistakes we have made so far is something that we can do with the people we work with as educators. And it's something that we're not necessarily geared to doing coming from modern schooling, modern education. Modern education is about the reduction of complexity, the one right answer, and this idea that we can fix the world as it is. Maybe we can't. So the idea here is that in order to open our critical eyes, we have to not be afraid of the complexity, uncertainty, and plurality of the world in order to be able to deal with inequality. And in order to open our hearts, we will have to open ourselves to the pain that we have constantly inflicted on others. So for us to have all of this we have today, other people have to be enslaved, the earth needs to be damaged and harmed. So how is it that we came to want things that do harm to others? And unless we face that pain, we face the pain we inflict and the pain we're capable of inflicting, we're not going to be able to have the courage to see that our hearts are actually much bigger than we think they are, and connect to each other, reconnect to the sense of connection to each other that we might have lost through our own indoctrination in schooling in the idea of separability that these communities have talked about. So next, tomorrow and Saturday in the workshops, we're going to be talking about what it means to do that in practice, in activities outside, as we do when we're dealing with the Scouts movement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vanessa, very much for your presentation, for your insights, for your thoughts. So, now the moment to ask the very last questions of the evening. What an opportunity. Do we have a hand? We do have a hand over there. There's a gentleman over there.
Tomáš, Czech Republic. I'd like to ask how to deal with the skepticism that comes from like being critical about everything. Like, I've dealt with it several times that world so sucks and so on, and that everything's so hard to solve, and you know, how to deal with it within myself. Thank you.
I think that's a great question. In my research group, we talk about the critical eyes as the idea of intellectual accountability and intellectual answerability. And if we open your eyes very wide, you will see that the problems are overwhelming, right? And sometimes incommensurable, and the risk of cynicism and paralysis is actually there. But that's why we talk about it together with the idea of open hearts, which we call in the research group the idea of existential surrender. Two different kinds of relationships. So we cannot have one without the other. So if we go into a situation only with critical eyes and with closed hearts, we're not going to be able to see the miracle that can happen when we can connect to each other and we can connect to the spirit of the place that you're in, and to create change that is not predictable change, that is not the planned change that we're trying to enforce. But if we go to a place also only with your open heart, but your closed critical eyes, you're open to these miracles, but you may be reproducing the same mistakes, thinking you're doing something new. So that is the combination of the critical eyes and the open heart. We also talk about two other things, but in the workshop we can talk about that. We talk about open flesh and open dreaming, which is the idea of not projecting what you want the world to be and walking together with people rather than trying to take them to your vision of reality. So, and also decentering the self, not making it about yourself, but making it about something bigger, right? And where you're not necessarily looking for self-validation, self-promotion, or self-congratulations when you are engaging in an activity. You do it for a different reason, for a different desire. So that's the kind of work that we've been trying. It's not that we have the answers. We're thinking about this as an experiment that will lead us to different mistakes. We're just a bit bored with the mistakes we have done so far, especially the mistakes where pedagogists focus on the self, and the idea that the self and putting ourselves in the center of the world is the answer. We're trying out other pedagogies of encounter where we talk about disarmament, decentering, and displacing of knowledge, so that we can always reach the limits of our knowledge systems and not be afraid of what comes with that. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Tomáš. Thank you for the question, Vanessa. We would have time for one very short, very simple question. Do we have any simple questions to very complicated topics? There is a very simple question over there. I'm curious.
Thank you for this presentation, Urška from Slovenia. I might have a simple question. I'm a simple girl. I was thinking what you've been saying, answering the previous question, and how we have to open ourselves to others and to different ways of understanding the world. How, can this be related to activism? And do you see any connections, or is this aligned with the activism?
I think there are different ways of understanding activism, and there are different types of activism. So of course, in one way, it would be one way of it's impossible not to be an activist in a way, whether you're aware of it or not, because we're always making a difference, for better or worse. There's no decision that we make that doesn't have that political consequence and material consequence on others. But the idea of openness, I think, is newer in activism, and it has a different history. And I think the openness that I'm talking about, activism also has a history of the focus on the self, at least in Western cultures. In other cultures, it doesn't. So maybe understanding activism through different cultures might be a way of answering your question, right? A way of exploring what activism might mean in cultures that are anthropocentric, that center human beings in relation to nature, and that center human beings at the center of everything, and cultures that don't do that. So what would activism mean in these different places? And in that sense, I think activism is related to everything, depending on how you define it.
Thank you for the question. Thank you for the answer. Thank you for the presentation, Vanessa. Thank you very much.